Hey guys, it's Miss Vinson. Today we're going to continue talking about the resource market, and in particular, we're going to talk about the perfectly competitive labor market. In a perfectly competitive product market, individual firms were the sellers. There were many firms that were competing against each other to try to sell identical products to customers. What this meant is that they had no control over the price they charged. They had to take the market equilibrium price if they wanted to sell any output. So they were price takers. This meant that the demand curve on the graph of an individual firm in perfectly competitive market was perfectly elastic. It was horizontal. Since they had no control over market price, the only thing they had control over was the amount of stuff that they produced. So remember, Q star was so important, and that was looking for where MR equals MC. All this information should sound like review to you. You should be very comfortable with this information. What we're going to talk about now is perfect competition, but in the resource market. Now remember, firms are buyers in the resource market. Firms are trying to buy the labor. They're trying to buy the workers. So in this case, guys, the firms are competing against other firms not to sell things, but to hire workers to buy those laborers. Now, these unskilled workers, they can work in a variety of applications and industries, and they know this. So they're going to be looking for a job that is going to offer them a decent wage. Well, if I'm trying to hire some workers and the wage I offer is too low, they're not going to come to me to work. And so instead of being a price taker to sell my stuff, I now have to be a wage taker so that I can hire some workers. What this basically means, guys, is that as long as I pay an equilibrium wage, then I am going to be able to hire as many workers as I want to have at my company. So on our graph, instead of having a perfectly elastic demand curve, we are going to have a perfectly elastic supply curve of labor. Instead of trying to figure out the best output level to produce, I'm trying to figure out what's the best number of inputs that I should hire. I want to hire all the workers where the marginal revenue product, the value of what they produce, is more than the marginal factor cost, which is what I'm spending on these workers, which is their wage. Let's look at some graphs. The top two graphs, the first set of graphs that we're going to have, is going to be the perfectly competitive output market. This is what we've already done. This is when you have thousands of soybean sellers or thousands of strawberry sellers. So the graph on the left-hand side, that is going to be a graph that represents the whole entire strawberry market. The graph on the right is going to be a graph of one single seller in that market. So this individual strawberry seller knows that they have to take the market equilibrium price, and as long as they don't deviate from that market price, they are going to be able to sell as many strawberries as they want at the market that day. So we have a perfectly elastic demand curve for this firm in the output market. We also have our marginal cost curve. Our marginal cost curve is telling us how much extra it costs to produce and make another bushel of strawberries. So we know the best possible output level is where MR hits MC. That is our Q star. That tells us how many bushels of strawberries we need to make and sell to maximize our profit. Now let's draw another set of graphs below these two. The graph on the left is going to be the graph of the labor market. And this is a perfectly competitive labor market. Now remember, the suppliers of labor are all of the workers. So notice what we have on our y-axis. It's not price anymore. It's the wage, because the cost of resources, the price of resources, is wage. What we have on our x-axis is the number of laborers, all right? And usually that's in hours, because our wage is usually measured in terms of hours, like $5 an hour or $7.25 an hour. So labor in terms of hours. Now, we got to draw our demand curve on our labor market graph. Now, this demand curve represents hundreds of companies that are trying to hire these unskilled workers. So this demand curve represents all the restaurant industries, all the hotel industries, all the amusement park industries, all the construction industries, all the textile industries, any of these industries that just hire these unskilled workers to do a variety of different jobs. Now notice that when your supply and demand curve intersect, there is an equilibrium wage. This is a wage that is acceptable to the workers. If you offer this wage to workers, then you will be able to hire as many workers as you possibly want. Let's look at an individual firm who's trying to buy workers in this resource market. So the graph on the right is the graph of an individual firm. And we can even say it's me. I'm just that same strawberry seller. I know that as long as I offer that equilibrium wage, I am going to have no problem hiring as many workers as I possibly want. So notice on this graph, guys, the supply curve, the supply of labor, is perfectly elastic. The question now is, how many workers do I want to hire? I want to hire every worker that is going to bring in more money for my company than I'm spending on their wage. So remember, your wage is also called your MFC, your marginal factor cost. We have a term that we looked at yesterday, which was how much value does that next resource bring in whenever they produce stuff for my company. And that was the marginal revenue product. Remember, what we did is we took how much extra stuff this worker made and we multiplied it by the price that I could sell it for, or the marginal revenue that we could sell it for. And if they were making and bringing in more revenue than I was spending on wages for that worker, then we said that that was a good hire. Suppose that the demand for strawberries increases. So in the strawberry market graph, we're going to shift the demand curve to the right. Notice what happens when you shift the demand curve to the right. The equilibrium price for strawberries goes up. What does this mean for the sellers? Well, if I am one of these strawberry sellers and I have to take the equilibrium price, this means that now I can charge more money for my strawberries. So I'm going to be earning more profits. But also notice how the equilibrium quantity of strawberries has increased in the market. Who's going to be making this extra quantity? It's going to be the firms that are already in the market, the existing firms in the strawberry market like me. Look what happens on my individual firm's graph whenever I raise my price and I get to charge a higher price when my demand curve goes up. Notice that I am hitting my marginal cost curve now at an output level that is further over to the right. Instead of producing at my old Q star, now MR hits MC a little further to the right, and that is my new Q star with these more profitable prices. Now, if I am going to be making more strawberries, how am I going to increase my output? We're in the short run, so I can't really get more tractors and I can't really get more big pieces of equipment or more land. The only way that I can really increase my output in the short run is by changing my variable resources, right? Is by changing my workers. So if I am going to be growing all these extra strawberries, if I want to maximize my profit, then that means that I need to hire more workers to make this extra output. So since I know I need to hire more workers, what's going to happen on my individual graph for the resource market? my demand for workers is going to shift to the right. My individual demand for workers is going to increase. I, as a strawberry seller, need to hire more workers so that I can make more output and maximize my profit. So my marginal revenue product curve, which is like my demand curve for workers, is going to shift to the right. Now, when my marginal revenue product curve shifts to the right, that means that I can now hire more workers. Let's take a look at how an increase in the selling price of strawberries can affect the number of workers that I am willing to hire. Now remember, we had a chart that we work with. We have a labor column. We have a quantity column, which is telling us the total output produced by all of those workers collectively together. And we also have our marginal productivity column, which tells us how much extra stuff did each new worker produce. So if we look at our marginal productivity column in this chart, we can see that the first worker added an extra 10 bushels of strawberries. The second worker added an extra 12 bushels of strawberries when they were hired. The third worker added an extra 8 bushels. The fourth worker added an extra 4 bushels. And the fifth worker only added an extra 2 bushels. Let's look at the value that each of these workers is contributing to our company's revenue. Our first worker made 10 bushels of strawberries. Now, when the price of strawberries was $3, that means that that first worker was only bringing in $30 in extra revenue for our company. When the second worker was making 12 bushels, they were bringing in an extra $36. When the third worker was making 8 bushels, they were only bringing in an extra $24. The fourth worker made 4 bushels and so brought in an extra revenue of $12. And the fifth worker only could make 2 bushels, so they only brought in an extra $6. Suppose I'm paying each one of these workers a wage of $10. So my marginal factor cost for each one of these workers is $10. Well, if I'm paying $10 to the first worker and they're bringing in $30, they're bringing in more money than I'm spending on them. I want them. If my second worker, I'm spending $10 on, but they're bringing in $36, definitely want that second worker. The third worker, I got to spend $10 on them, but they're bringing in $24, still good. The fourth worker, I'm spending $10 on them, they're bringing in $12 in revenue, still good. The fifth worker, I'm spending $10 on them, but they're only bringing in $6 worth of revenue. They're not worth it for me to hire. So as it stands, at a price of $3 for a bushel of strawberries, I'm only really going to hire 4 workers. But what if the price level changes? What if there's an increase in the demand for strawberries and that increases the equilibrium price of strawberries and now I can sell strawberries for $6 a bushel? That might increase the amount of workers that I'm willing to hire. Let's find the value of what these workers are contributing now that we can sell these strawberries for a price of $6. So now that first worker is bringing in an extra value of $60 to my revenue. That second worker has brought in $72 of revenue for my company. So that third worker is bringing in $48 of revenue to my company. That fourth worker is bringing in $24 in revenue to add to my company. And the fifth worker, remember they can only make 2, but 2 times 6, that's $12 of extra revenue they're bringing into my company. Now my wage, my marginal factor cost has not changed. So now let's rerun this scenario. If I have to pay these workers $10, how many workers would I be willing to hire? So when the price level of what I'm selling goes up, then that means that I am able to afford to hire more workers. So guys, on our graph, our marginal revenue product curve, our demand curve for workers is going to shift to the right. So notice that on our individual strawberry firms resource market graph, where MRP hits MFC, that tells us the best number of workers we want to hire. And then on our graph in the output market, we're at where MR hits MC, and that tells us how much stuff we want to make. We'll be doing some practice on this. So until later, see you next time, guys.